Hey guys, Brian here, and today I want to discuss with you a thread that I found over on the 14 discussion subreddit. I'll include a link in the description for you guys if you want to go check it out for yourself. But in general, there's some really interesting points that I think the threads make. A couple of commenters really kind of knock it out of the park, and I want to add my thoughts to it as a veteran of this game for 13 years. And what does it feel like months after Endwalker, a month after 6.1? Where are we in terms of Final Fantasy XIV? Is this natural, or is this just the normal cycle of a theme park based MMORPG? So all in all, let's go ahead and dive in. I think you're going to get some hopefully good insight, especially if you came into Final Fantasy XIV with Shadowbringers and maybe you're a little bit shocked by how you feel about it, like with all the hype and with all the story and with all the emotion that it comes with a Final Fantasy story. I think this is something that hopefully we can talk about and figure out what's maybe the best way forward and how do we essentially enjoy Final Fantasy XIV for another decade or more. Anyway, the post really is asking a question here. It says, I beat 6.0 months ago and I haven't had any urge to come back. I feel like I beat the game and I've been playing for 8 years, but I'm still paying my sub. Anyone else in my boat? And I want to highlight a couple comments here real easily quick. It says, that's pretty common across all games with long lifespans like this. Just unsub and come back when you feel like trying out the new content and story down the line. It's not a big deal, but it's a waste of money if you're really not playing the game. And they followed up and says, I would unsub for sure, but I have one of those ball and chains in the game, a house. We all know the state of housing in the market. I'm paying real life rent for a virtual house. And Matt in this case says, I was in a similar situation 2 years ago. After months, I gave up and just let the house be demolished. Letting the FOMO win wasn't worth my time and money. After a year, I kind of regretted losing some of my decor items. I didn't store anything, but I could always go after them again if I wanted. I haven't dabbled with housing again since returning though. And it's that what I think is the kind of the real elephant in the room. I've talked about it numerous times, the state of housing. I think now that the lottery system appears to at least be working, hopefully that kind of helps at least ease a lot of that burden in terms of getting back in, where you can at least raise the money and you can kind of bid on a plot. And if you win, you win. If you don't, you don't. You're not having to stand around clicking on a sign. And so personally speaking, I've been playing this game for 13 years. And I definitely identify with what the core question this thread has, that sense of having completed the game, having beaten Endwalker, and then essentially stepping into the patch cycle of Final Fantasy XIV. And that's where, obviously I don't know exactly where you watching this video right now are coming into Final Fantasy XIV, whether you've been with the game for a long time, whether you just started within, the last year or two, or maybe you're returning after a nice long break. I think essentially kind of something really rings true. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. One of the things I tend to see within kind of angry comments, and honestly what I should probably do is just highlight those and save those when I see them come across. That way I can kind of reference those so you guys see exactly what I'm talking about. But generally an angry Final Fantasy XIV player is somebody like, I've played this game for 5,000 hours and I've played this game for 10,000 hours and eventually they just kind of reach a point where maybe something that bugs them a little bit, right, eventually boils up and becomes this really big thing. My wife kind of calls it love's true cross. The thing maybe you love about somebody is also the thing that maybe just drives you crazy about that same person. And so in Final Fantasy XIV, clearly there could always be something that could maybe nagging at you, or something you actually appreciate but ultimately you get tired of or you get frustrated at because it obviously continues to maintain the same kind of cadence. The patch cycle is very similar. It's very natural in its structure, where what I always kind of say, especially to new people coming into the game, is that you get from the 0.5 to the 0.1 patch where you have a lot of excitement, a lot of people are playing through the story, but then the vast part of the community says, I finished the story, I'll be back for the next round. They take a break, they unsub, and then they come back with a 0.5 patch because the game makes it easy to get caught back up. If you're constantly working on capping out your tomes, if you're constantly working on that gear grind, if you're constantly working on being, top tier across multiple jobs, then essentially what you end up finding is that when you kind of look around, all of a sudden you realize you're on a wheel and you're not really going anywhere. And every 6 months, or now 8 months, the game kind of shifts, and then now there's something new to chase, and you can get really fatigued and really tired out. And I think that's one of the things I noticed in Stormblood, is that I was like, oh, this is exactly like it was in ARR and Heavensward. I don't need to put as much effort in. And then there's something freeing in that. There's something legitimately freeing in sitting down and saying, oh, if I just wait to the 0.4, 0.5 patch to really grind out my tomes, I'll be just as good as everybody else, and that gear will carry me into the expansion and beyond, and then essentially kind of the process starts all over again. We can talk about the merits of this being a strength or a weakness with the game overall, but I think essentially it is just understanding the game's core design and how it actually serves as a way to get people back into the game who've taken a break. And so just like Yoshi P, and as an old Final Fantasy XI player, as an old school MMO player, I know, and I talk to old school MMO players all the time, that seems antithetical to what you want in a game. You want a game to consume you. You want a game that you just live and breathe in, and I get that. But I don't think Final Fantasy XIV is that. It can do that. You can choose to do that, but you have to kind of go out of your way outside the kind of the main progression system, because any system of vertical progression, especially in a system like 14 where gear doesn't matter, where it's just a stat stick, it lends itself to burnout pretty quickly if you're not careful. And there's nothing wrong with getting burned out. Just recognize that rather than sitting here and looking at it and saying, oh my gosh. So yeah, in this case, then it shifts to, yeah, let go of the house. Like, don't be paying real money for a virtual house that you're not using. Somebody could easily take advantage of that. And in fact, if we actually had that model, I wonder if two things would end up being true. If we see if funds, essentially from a budget perspective, are like, oh, a lot of people have unsubscribed. That sends a message. It tells, Yoshi P, like from a budget perspective, like what should they invest in? And then from the other side of it is it opens up housing, so it ends up being less of a crisis. So there's a part of that FOMO that people hold on to with money, and they aren't using these houses, which leads into kind of my critique of the housing system being these empty neighborhoods that you never really see anybody in. Because people are just kind of holding on to them. They finally got one and they don't want to let go. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, where housing is probably in such a bad state because people don't want to let it go, and then they end up paying real money just to hold on to something that they might return to in a couple of months or a year or two. Like, people ebb and flow in and out of 14 as they do with any MMO nowadays, pretty naturally, pretty seasonally. And that's just essentially what the data shows us. Whether you like that or not, I'm sorry, like, that's just what the data shows us, and the content literally is king when it comes to games like Final Fantasy XIV. And so we do have a big patch coming on I think the June the 7th, so coming up pretty quickly with the 6.15. And that's going to add in some new content for people to kind of jump back into, so that's going to be exciting. And then we'll go and shift into the data center visit and in 6.2, in which the story will continue, and we'll start seeing more of these systems and more of these gameplay features being brought in, and something to be excited about. So if you are feeling winded, if you are feeling burned out, like, you don't have to go and unsub. Like, if you don't feel like that's, like, if you're like, oh, I'm just going to take a couple weeks off. But yeah, maybe try to make sure you're playing another game. I think that's going to help overall. That's my general philosophy. That's why it does take me so long to put out guides, is that I refuse to let myself play the game in such a degree that I end up hating it. And I see that happen a lot with content creators. I see that happen a lot with gamers. And it's just something that I recognize. I remember when the first time I burned out of 14, I was so excited for Heavensward. I played through Burnout. I played all of Heavensward, and I got to the end of Heavensward, and then I took 6 months off and didn't log in once. And I was like, oh, okay, clearly I was burnt out going into Heavensward, but I didn't recognize that. I didn't give myself that ability to breathe. I didn't give myself the ability to check out other things. And it ended up making a long gap between playing the game before coming back in and playing more of the expansion. So I try not to let that ever happen again. And the only way that I do that is that if I don't feel like playing, I just don't play. Being that I'm still subbed to the game, I'm going to keep being subbed to the game, but that might change. There's no guarantee that I'll be subbed through the entirety of the patch cycle, especially if I'm not playing, if I'm not taking advantage of it. Heck, I'm subbed to Final Fantasy XI right now. I'm playing Final Fantasy XI right now, so it's going to be what it is. But again, I thought this was an interesting viewpoint, because I don't think this individual's alone. I think this is something that we see happen a lot, and I think the confusion comes in is from players who came in through a hype cycle, and then they're just kind of curious as like, hey, what happened? It's very natural. It happens with pretty much every game that has not even just a long life, but it's a live service that has that persistent online world, or just that continual flow of content. Sometimes it's the expansion really gives you a bunch of content. The pre-expansion gives you all the content that was added in that expansion, and then you have the excitement taking you into the future of the game. But 14, that's its cycle, that's its pattern, and that's what it does. And you can let me know whether you like that or you don't like that. Obviously in the comments, we can have that discussion. If we need a follow-up video, we can do that as well. But anyway, thought this was an interesting topic. Hopefully you enjoyed my thoughts on it. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day and wonderful weekend. Hopefully I'll see you in my next video. But until then, take care.
Yeah. It's time to chill out on the couch and read some comments. That's right. You know me when it comes to Destiny. I'm off with the clan, and I'm glad you're feeling better. Oh.